It took Jasmine Crockett just 7 words, 7 sharp, calculated words, to mock J.D. Vance on live television. The room laughed, cameras zoomed in, headlines practically wrote themselves. But then, 30 seconds passed, no comeback, no raised voice, just one action. And the silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was haunting. Even her strongest allies couldn't look her in the eye. Because in that moment, J.D. didn't just respond, he revealed something deeper than debate, louder than applause. What did he do? And why did America suddenly stop laughing? This isn't a news report, it's a story, shaped with imagination, but rooted in truth. The details may be dramatized, but the emotions are real. Because in politics, as in life, the lines that divide fact and feeling are often where the most powerful moments live. So lean in, just for 60 seconds, because sometimes the most unforgettable moment in politics isn't what someone says, it's what no one dares to say back. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It was barely 9:07 a.m., but Committee Room 214 felt like it had been simmering for hours. The walls, paneled with dark walnut and lined with 13 American flags, seemed tighter than usual. Rows of leather-bound chairs creaked under the restless shifting of interns, reporters, and policy staffers who'd claimed seats long before the hearing was scheduled to begin. Cameras clicked like distant lightning. Phones lit up with texts. "She's almost here." On one of the center monitors, the news crawl read in bold serif, "Live, Senate hearing on emergency energy funding, sparks expected." At the far end of the room, Senator J.D. Vance sat still, hands folded over a thin folder. No staffer hovered behind him, no papers scattered on the desk, just one cup of black coffee, cold now, and the sharp, unblinking gaze of a man who looked like he was counting the breaths of everyone in the room but his own. He wore a gray-blue tie, slightly wrinkled, and a navy suit that fit modestly, not powerfully. But power in that moment didn't need tailoring. It needed timing. From the side door, a low buzz rippled through the room. The door opened, not fast, not slow. And there she was, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, confident, press-ready, and fully aware of it. She didn't smile. She beamed, a curated, camera-calibrated look that said, "I already know how this ends." She wore a white blazer over deep plum, earrings that caught the light every time she turned, and a stack of briefing notes thick enough to block a punch. Phones rose like flowers toward sunlight. J.D. didn't move. Behind the chairs, 2 junior staffers exchanged whispers. $10, she goes viral before lunch. Only if Vance blinks first. They both chuckled, half as a joke, half in nervous respect for what J.D. might be capable of. A producer from a major network leaned in and muttered to her tech, "Mike Crockett hot the moment she speaks. And keep your finger on clip mark." That meant one thing. They weren't here for policy. They were here for the moment. And right now, the room belonged to her. J.D. shifted slightly, not toward the camera, not toward the crowd, but inward. His right hand slipped into the inside pocket of his coat. Just for a second, his thumb brushed the corner of an envelope, yellowed, slightly bent at the edge, sealed with tape that had been reapplied more than once. It wasn't labeled, it wasn't fresh, but it was heavy, not in weight, but in timing. He didn't take it out, just touched it, just remembered what was inside. No one saw it, except maybe the camera in the back row that caught everything when no one was watching. Up at the dais, the chairman banged the gavel once. "Senators, representatives, thank you. This hearing will now come to order." J.D. looked up slowly. Jasmine didn't glance his way. Not yet, but she would. And when she did, well, that was the part no one was ready for. The chairman's voice echoed for a moment too long before Jasmine Crockett took the mic. She didn't just lean forward, she claimed the space in front of her, like a performer stepping into spotlight, perfectly aware of every angle, every flash, every clip that might hit Twitter before the hearing even ended. Her opening remarks flowed smoothly, even disarmingly civil at first. She praised the committee's urgency, thanked the press for bearing witness, and even gave a soft nod to colleagues across the aisle who, despite our differences, share the goal of a more resilient future. It was velvet, measured, warm, rehearsed, but no one came here for velvet, and Jasmine knew it. Just 3 minutes in, she pivoted. Her tone sharpened. Her hands stopped gesturing. Her eyes locked onto J.D. Vance. Not long enough to acknowledge him, but just enough to challenge him. "I find it curious," she said, tilting her head slightly, "that Senator Vance wants to pour federal money back into coal infrastructure. Maybe he thinks we're still riding horses too." Laughter sparked instantly. It wasn't raucous, it was strategic. Enough to land on camera. Enough to rattle if you were the kind who rattled. J.D. Vance didn't blink. Jasmine smirked. Just a flick of the lip, but calibrated like a scalpel. "And while we're at it," she continued, "perhaps we should invest in telegraphs and Morse code. Heaven forbid we let the 21st century get in the way of nostalgia politics." More laughter now. Aid phones lit up. Hashtags were probably being drafted before she even finished her sentence. From the back of the room, a young reporter mouthed to his editor, "She just cooked him." J.D. remained still, expression unreadable. If her comments struck a nerve, it never showed on his face. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't sigh, didn't even shift in his chair. Instead, he turned slightly, barely noticeably, to his right and leaned toward his aide. "Start the clip," he whispered, voice low and even. "We go second." The aide's fingers hovered over a tablet screen, the cue already marked. No one else noticed. They were too focused on Jasmine's next sentence, or the ones they expected would follow. Another jab, a witticism, a viral moment dressed as policy critique. But the energy in the room had already shifted. You couldn't name it, not yet. But it was there, in the silence behind J.D.'s stillness, in the quiet alertness of someone who knows when not to fight fire with fire, but with something colder, sharper, heavier. The chairman thanked Congresswoman Crockett for her colorful candor, a diplomatic phrase that only half concealed his discomfort. J.D. didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't speak. He just folded his hands in front of him and stared ahead. There was nothing reactive in his posture, just waiting, like a coil pulled tight. Not from fear, but from certainty. The certainty that when his turn came, he wouldn't be swinging. He'd be showing, and that was always harder to recover from. Jasmine settled back in her seat, fully aware she'd landed the first blow. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that she'd just triggered the quietest, most devastating moment of the hearing, and it was only 30 seconds away. The laughter had faded, but the residue lingered, thin as smoke, sharp as vinegar. J.D. sat unmoved, hands still folded, the curve of his fingers resting neatly against the edge of the table. He didn't glance at Jasmine. He didn't need to. The performance had been for the cameras, not for him. But the room didn't know what he knew. They didn't hear what he'd heard. Not long ago, in the quiet of his Senate office, he'd listened to a voicemail left on a Friday night. Timid, broken, the voice of a woman trying not to cry while asking a stranger for something she no longer believed she'd receive. "I don't think this is the right number, but my daughter's on a ventilator and the power's out again. We can't get her to a hospital in time. I'm just leaving this here. Someone should know, even if it's too late." The sound quality had been poor, as if the call had been made from deep inside a cave. It wasn't even addressed to him directly, just a last-ditch effort that happened to land in the hands of a senator who, by all media accounts, was wasting time championing coal towns. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not his staff, not his wife, not the press. He didn't need to. That woman wasn't in this room. Her daughter wasn't either. Neither were the nurses who worked through snowstorms in trailers without heat, or the volunteers who delivered batteries to houses when the grid gave up again. None of them had seats in committee room 214. None of them had microphones. None of them got a moment to smirk or punch a line that trended. But they were the reason J.D. was here. He inhaled slowly, not for show, but for grounding. The envelope inside his coat was still there, resting against his chest. It hadn't moved since he placed it there that morning. A little worn, a little creased. Inside, a photo, a short handwritten note, and a single USB drive. No commentary, no performance. Just her voice. He'd already decided. When his turn came, There would be no clever retort, no crossfire, just the recording, raw, unedited, 29 seconds long. Let the room hear her. Let them sit in it. He glanced down briefly, not at the cameras, not at Jasmine, but at the desk. Neutral wood grain. Stillness, order, contrast. The chairman cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett. And now, Senator Vance, you have the floor. JD's head rose slowly. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the envelope, placing it softly on the table like something sacred, or maybe something about to detonate. With measured care, he opened it. From inside, he drew a small USB drive, black, unmarked. He held it for just a moment, pinched between two fingers like it weighed something far heavier than plastic, and then without a word, he placed it beside the mic. Cameras leaned in, staffers stilled. Even Jasmine, still half smiling, blinked once. JD didn't speak. Not yet. Because sometimes what comes next isn't a speech. It's a silence no one saw coming. The storm didn't roar in. It crept, low and wide over the hills of eastern Kentucky, as if it didn't need to announce itself. The air had already warned them. Aaron stood at the kitchen window of their single-wide trailer, staring past the hanging blinds into the dark beyond the yard. Trees were still, unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that made animals disappear. No wind, no crickets, just a silence too large for a place so small. Inside, the only sound was the soft hiss of the oxygen machine beside the couch. Her daughter Sophie, 4 years old, impossibly small, lay curled beneath a thin quilt, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator that kept her breathing. A soft glow from the unit's battery light blinked green, not full, not empty, but fading. Erin had already done everything she could. She'd charged the battery with the generator 2 days earlier, but fuel had run low and no delivery had come. There was talk of federal assistance, but talk was all it ever seemed to be out here. She checked her phone. No bars. Again. A low rumble of thunder rolled under her feet. She walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a flashlight, and tried to remember how many minutes they had if the power went out. 30? 25? The first flicker came at 10:42 p.m. The lights blinked once, then held. The fridge clicked. The ventilator let out a warning beep. Once, then silence again. Erin stepped closer to Sophie, adjusting the tubing. She didn't want to wake her, but something about that flicker made her feel like they'd already crossed into the part of the night you don't come back from. At 10:47, the lights failed completely. The battery on the ventilator clicked over automatically, but the green light was gone, replaced with a pulsing amber. Low, unstable, temporary. Erin's hands began to shake as she reached for her phone again. No signal. She walked outside barefoot into the wind, holding the phone above her head, then out to the end of the gravel driveway. Still nothing. Back inside, Sophie stirred and gave a soft cough. The ventilator beeped again, shorter now, less confident. Erin's breath caught. She redialed 911. Nothing. Redialed again. Still nothing. She opened her voicemail and pressed record. Her voice was tight, barely above a whisper, like speaking too loudly might drain the last bit of power from the air around her. I don't know if this is the right number. I don't think anyone's coming. My name is Erin. My daughter's 4. Her name's Sophie. She's on a vent. The power's been out. I just need someone to know we were here. That she was here. Thunder cracked overhead like a verdict. The flashlight flickered once in her hand. The ventilator did the same, and then it all went dark. For 15 minutes, Erin sat on the floor beside Sophie, singing softly in the dark, just in case her voice could do what the system could not. When the EMTs finally arrived, too late, they found the voicemail still unsent, saved in the drafts folder of a phone with 1% battery. It would take 3 days, a social worker, and a single forwarded email for that message to reach the inbox of a man named J.D. Vance. By 11:06 p.m., the storm had fully rolled over Johnson County, dumping rain in sheets so thick the roads disappeared. The 911 dispatch center, already short 2 operators that night, was flooded with calls from downed power lines, stranded vehicles, a nursing home without heat, and a collapsed mobile home roof 20 miles east. The blinking red call log surged, The air was filled with static and voices speaking over each other. One dispatcher answered a call only to realize she couldn't hear the other end. Another scribbled a street name she couldn't find on the map. Sophie's home number pinged their system 4 times. None were connected. At 11:13, the center marked the call as dropped. No confirmation. They moved on. In her trailer, lit only by a dying flashlight, Erin stared at the home screen of her phone. The emergency alerts never came. No cell tower recovered fast enough to carry her message out of the hills that night. But she tried one more thing. She searched her inbox. Buried beneath old utility bill receipts and fundraising emails, she found a contact link. Senator J.D. Vance, public comments. She didn't know what else to do. She'd seen his face on the news once, talking about power grids and coal. She couldn't remember what he said, only that he looked like someone who didn't speak just to be heard. The inbox had no name, just a blank email form and a small voicemail box labeled, "Submit a message to your representative." She pressed record. The timer began to tick upward. Her voice was calmer this time, not because she felt calm, but because everything else had gone quiet. "We're dying here. I know no one's coming. That's okay. I don't think this message is supposed to fix anything. I want someone to know. Her name's Sophie. She's the reason I still try. I just want her to be real to someone else before she's gone." She ended the recording at 38 seconds. The system clipped it automatically at 29. It uploaded slowly, spinning in a small gray circle for longer than it should have. She didn't wait to see if it sent. At 11:17, the phone screen went dark. The message did send, eventually. Not that night, but sometime in the following week, when emergency crews triaged the damage and a social worker compiled digital records from phones retrieved inside the worst-hit areas. Most of the messages were never listened to. Some were inaudible. Others were misrouted into press accounts or spam folders. But Erin's message, because it was labeled with the senator's official address, landed in a folder marked Constituent Voicemail, Energy Policy. Weeks later, while reviewing comments before a hearing, JD's staff flagged the clip, unsure what to make of it. It had no context, no address, no follow-up. But JD listened, twice, and then again. He didn't say much afterward, just asked the aide to trace what they could, then quietly downloaded the clip to a USB. He didn't call a press conference, didn't tweet, didn't mention it in any hearing yet. It sat in his drawer for over a month, inside a plain manila envelope, waiting for the moment when someone would laugh too easily, speak too soon, forget who wasn't in the room. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when the envelope arrived. Unmarked, smudged at the corners. The kind of mail most aides would toss in the no-return address pile. But something about its weight, thick but quiet, made it stand out on J.D. Vance's desk. He didn't open it right away. He turned it over in his hand once, twice. There was no name on the outside, no letterhead, just a worn beige exterior and faint impressions of fingers that had held it tightly. Inside, he found 2 things: a handwritten note on lined paper and a USB drive wrapped in a bandage. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, block letters with soft slants, like someone who took care even when they didn't have much time. "Senator Vance, I'm not writing on behalf of any group. I'm a rural nurse in Martin County. I was on shift the night the girl passed. Her name was Sophie. Her mother, Erin, tried everything. We don't want media attention. We don't want a GoFundMe. We just want someone in that big room to remember her, not as a symbol, not as a tragedy, but as a real child who never made it to kindergarten. They didn't want attention. They wanted to be counted." JD stared at the words for several minutes before unwrapping the USB. It wasn't new, scuffed at the sides like it had been plugged into too many old machines. Still, it clicked softly into the side port of his laptop. No folders, just a single file. Sophie audio clip, 29 seconds.wav. He closed his door, drew the blinds, unplugged his office phone. Then he pressed play. The voice that came through was brittle, like it had passed through mountains to reach him. Erin's voice, calm, almost eerily so, not pleading, not dramatic, just determined. "We're dying here. I know no one's coming. That's okay. Her name's Sophie. She's the reason I still try. Just want someone to know. The audio crackled once, then ended. Just 29 seconds. He sat there for a long while after, not moving, not checking emails, not writing policy notes. This wasn't a budget line. This wasn't a statistic. This wasn't even about energy anymore. This was about a mother who'd known she wasn't going to be saved and still chose to speak, not for herself, but so her daughter wouldn't vanish into silence. And now that voice was his to carry, not with speeches, not with slogans, just memory and timing. That night, JD didn't speak to his press team, didn't ask for talking points. He simply slipped the USB back into the envelope, folded the nurse's letter beside it, and placed them both into the inside pocket of his coat. From that moment on, it traveled with him. To every briefing, every hearing, every hallway conversation that drifted into abstractions about grid reliability and modernization frameworks. No one else knew what was in that pocket, but he did. And he knew one day, sooner or later, someone would say something reckless. Someone would smirk a little too wide, mock a little too loud. And when that moment came, he wouldn't interrupt. He'd just press play. JD didn't say a word as he reached forward and gently inserted the USB into the console. The motion was unremarkable, quiet even. But in a room filled with people who lived off anticipation, it landed like a signal flare. A murmur swept through the back rows. A few aides leaned forward, assuming slides or charts would appear on the screen. One of the camera operators zoomed in on his hands, waiting for him to reach for a mic. But he didn't. Instead, JD pressed one key, just one. The lights didn't dim. No one introduced what was about to play. There was no disclaimer, no setup, no commentary, just audio. At first, there was only static, that kind of brittle, uneven crackle that sounds like it's traveled too far to still be heard. A few people blinked. One woman near the press row leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "Is this a mistake?" Then the voice arrived. Software strained, female, controlled. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was trying to hold the fear back. "We're dying here." 3 words. It wasn't said loudly. It wasn't screamed, but it landed. "I know no one's coming. That's okay." A rustle of paper in the room. Someone shifted in a chair too quickly, then froze. The voice continued. "Her name's Sophie. She's the reason I still try." There was a pause, almost long enough for someone to interrupt, but no one did. Just want someone to know. And then, nothing. No music, no narration, no ending tone, just a soft breath, not quite a sob, but close, and then silence. The clip ended. JD didn't move. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't look at Jasmine. He simply leaned back slightly in his chair, his hands calmly resting one atop the other. The silence in the room wasn't forced. It wasn't staged. It was earned. For the first time all morning, no one typed. No one whispered. One of the interns near the wall pulled his notepad to his chest like it might protect him from what he'd just heard. Jasmine Crockett shifted in her seat, just slightly. Her smile had vanished. Not out of guilt, but because the room had changed shape. This wasn't a place for performance anymore. Not when someone's final words had just echoed between polished wood panels and million-dollar microphones. She looked down, not at shame, at distance. No one spoke. The chairman leaned toward his mic, then hesitated, his finger hovering, unsure whether to break the spell. His mouth opened, then closed again. It wasn't just about what they'd heard, it was about what they hadn't. No bill had been cited, no statistics had been offered. JD hadn't said a single sentence, and yet he'd said more than anyone else in the room. Outside, the storm had long passed. Inside, it had just arrived. JD finally moved. Not much, just a shift of posture, as if returning to gravity after a long float in something heavier than sound. Still, he said nothing, because what was there to say? He hadn't come to fight. He had come to remember. And now, so had they. The clip ended, but the silence didn't. It hovered, dense, fragile, alive. The kind of silence that doesn't ask to be broken because it shouldn't be. J.D. Vance leaned slightly forward and, for the first time that morning, spoke. Just one line. No preamble, no performance. That's what losing power sounds like. Not electrical power, not political power, just power. The kind that keeps a child breathing, the kind no one remembers until it's gone. No one clapped, no one nodded. It wasn't that kind of moment. On the press bench, one journalist slowly lowered her camera. Another stopped typing mid-sentence. A third, still gripping his phone, let it slip to his lap, as if realizing the moment wasn't meant to be captured, but absorbed. The chairman cleared his throat. Once, twice. He looked down at his agenda, fumbling for the next bullet point, but the words blurred together. It felt wrong to pivot, to say, "Thank you, Senator. Next up, broadband expansion funding." He tapped the mic anyway, trying to reclaim the rhythm of the hearing. "Thank you, Senator Vance," he said softly. "We appreciate your perspective." JD didn't respond. He didn't need to. He wasn't here to be appreciated. Jasmine Crockett sat still, arms folded. Her eyes weren't on JD. They weren't on anyone. She stared just past the committee nameplate in front of her, as if reading a sentence that wasn't printed. Her aide leaned over, whispering something about rebuttal time, but she waved him off. Her follow-up question, prepped and pre-written just minutes earlier, was no longer relevant. Not because the facts had changed, but because the tone had. The room had been recalibrated. The emotional ground had shifted. She could feel it under her heels. One of the junior staffers, seated 3 rows back, jotted a note in the margin of his folder. "First time I've seen a room go quiet without a vote." Outside the chamber, a producer for a major news network leaned over to her control team in the hall and whispered, "Scrap the segment format. Just air the audio. No commentary." Inside, the hearing was technically still in motion, but no one was really listening anymore. Not in the usual way. The script had cracked. Something raw had slipped through. The chairman, now visibly unsure, looked toward Jasmine, cueing her for the next round of questioning. She opened her folder, scanned the page once, then let it fall shut. "I'll yield for now," she said quietly. Her voice, usually so precise, came out flattened. Not defeated, not humiliated, just measured, in a way that said she'd been reminded of something she didn't expect to carry into this hearing. JD gave no acknowledgement. He wasn't savoring anything. He wasn't claiming victory. He simply reached forward, removed the USB, and slid it gently back into his coat pocket. And with that, the moment was over. Except it wasn't, because the room hadn't moved. The staffers hadn't resumed their hum. The press hadn't resumed typing. Even the air seemed to pause, unsure what should come next. The words had ended, but the truth hadn't. Sometimes the most powerful verdict isn't spoken aloud. It's what stays behind when everyone else tries to move on. By the time the hearing adjourned, the clip had already made its way online. A junior intern for a media watchdog account uploaded it from her phone. Just the audio and a silent pan of the room while it played. No cuts, no graphics, just 30 seconds of unfiltered quiet. She called it "When Power Fails." 3 hours later, a freelance journalist retitled it, "The 30-second Silence That Stopped Congress." Within 6 hours, the clip had over 4.1 million views. But it wasn't just views. It was the comments that cracked open something deeper. A retired Army medic from Pennsylvania posted, "We lost a patient in Fallujah because the base's generator died. Never thought I'd see something like that happen here, at home." A teacher in rural West Virginia wrote, "Our school's heat went out for 3 days last winter. We held class in gloves and coats. No one came." And then a trucker from Nebraska uploaded a video from a rest stop. "I ain't political, never have been. But I watched that video and I thought about my sister. She died in a blackout 2 years ago. No backup, no help, no name on the news. This one hit different." The hashtag 30-second silence began trending by midnight. It didn't start from one side of the aisle. It started from the middle, from the forgotten places, the overlooked towns, the Americans who didn't attend hearings, but lived with their consequences. They weren't talking about energy policy anymore. They were talking about being seen. And then came the remix. A TikTok user stitched together Jasmine Crockett's smirking comment from earlier in the hearing, "Maybe Senator Vance thinks we're still riding horses," with the full 29-second audio of Aaron's voice. No narration, just a hard cut. Her joke, then Sophie's mother, then silence. The post was titled, "This is who she laughed at." It got over 2 million shares in under 24 hours. Mainstream news outlets picked it up, but by then it was already beyond anyone's control. It didn't matter what the commentators said or which side tried to frame it. The moment had escaped the narrative. It belonged to the people now. Inside Congress, Jasmine Crockett's staff scrambled. Her press secretary drafted a response emphasizing her commitment to rural infrastructure and apologizing if her words were misinterpreted. But even that felt too polished, too late, because the story wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't even about JD. It was about a mother who had no backup power, no voice, no audience. Until one senator played her words without asking for applause. JD didn't tweet about it. He didn't repost the clip. He went home that night to Ohio, had dinner with his wife, and sat on the porch in silence for a long time, watching the lights flicker in distant farmhouses and wondering how many of them were one storm away from the same call. A single voice, a broken system, a moment the country didn't see coming, and somehow, 30 seconds later, everyone was watching. By the next morning, the backlash began, not from the public, but from the machine. Within 24 hours of the clip going viral, the political infrastructure kicked into survival mode. Think tanks, advocacy groups, and media pundits scrambled to frame, deflect, or redirect the national moment that had somehow slipped out of their hands. The first wave came from a prominent Beltway think tank. In a carefully worded blog post titled "Emotion is Not Energy Policy," the group criticized JD Vance for weaponizing individual grief to manipulate federal discourse. It accused him of emotional opportunism and warned that anecdotal tragedy is not a substitute for actionable legislation. Another op-ed followed. Senator Vance's silence was loud, but was it leadership? On cable news, the split was immediate and predictable. One network aired the clip in full, calling it a masterclass in moral clarity. A host praised JD for resisting the performative trap of politics and letting real Americans speak. The segment cut to a coal miner in West Virginia saying, "He didn't fight for applause. He fought to remember her." Another network, meanwhile, painted a different picture. A panel of commentators debated whether JD had staged the moment. "We don't even know if that voicemail was verified," one host said. "And if it's real, why bring it to a Senate hearing? That's theater, not governance." Online, partisan pages echoed the divide. Memes appeared. Some made JD into a folk hero. Others caricatured him as a cold manipulator hiding behind tragedy. None of it felt real. Not like the voice in that recording. In the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett appeared on CNN. The host didn't waste time. "Congresswoman, your earlier comment about Senator Vance and coal, do you stand by it?" Jasmine paused, noticeably composed. The smirk was gone. "I regret the joke," she said carefully. "It was ill-timed. I think Senator Vance and I both care about the people we serve, even if we disagree on how to serve them." Then she pivoted. "But we can't lose sight of the real crisis. Climate change, grid instability, our over-reliance on outdated systems. We need clean, sustainable energy. That's what I've been fighting for. That's what still matters." It was polished, measured, maybe even sincere. But America wasn't listening to the spin. They were still listening to Sophie. The clip hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. It was no longer just about a hearing. It was about a conversation that had never been allowed in the room to begin with. People weren't quoting JD's one-liner. They were quoting Aaron. "She's the reason I still try." That sentence had made its way onto murals, into Facebook headers, on T-shirts at church potlucks in towns politicians hadn't visited in decades. More powerful still were the new voices it awakened. A nurse from Kansas posted her own voice memo to her congressman. A bus driver in Idaho recorded a message from his phone, played on his local radio station. "We're still out here, still trying. Don't wait for us to vanish." It wasn't JD's moment anymore. It wasn't Jasmine's fall. It was Sophie's voice. And America, at least the part that wasn't already screaming, was listening. Because no matter how the parties spun it, Something deeper had cracked open. Not because it was tragic, but because it had been ignored. And now finally someone had pressed play. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't televised, no teleprompters, no curated backdrop of flags, just a small-town radio station in southern Ohio. A Thursday morning slot, AM frequency, low wattage, where J.D. Vance had agreed to do a routine interview about energy infrastructure. But by now, nothing felt routine. Halfway through the segment, after answering a few standard questions about funding, mechanisms, and rural grid repair, the host leaned in toward the mic and asked, "Senator, is it true you received a letter from Sophie's mother?" J.D. paused. The sound engineer in the booth glanced up. "Yes," he said finally. "I've had it in my coat pocket for weeks." A longer pause. "Would you be willing to read it?" He pulled the folded page from his breast pocket. The paper had softened at the creases, corners dulled from weeks of wear. The handwriting wasn't polished. Words ran too close to the margins, and a few letters were retraced where the ink had faded. J.D. adjusted the mic and read, "Senator Vance, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a mother. That's all. My daughter's name was Sophie. She loved butterflies. She hated loud noises. She died in the dark, and no one came. I don't blame you. I don't blame anyone. All I asked was for someone to see us before we disappeared. That's all. Aaron." There was no analysis, no slogan, no pivot, just quiet. The host didn't respond immediately. Neither did J.D. There wasn't anything to add, but the phones lit up. Within minutes, the station received more than 200 voicemails. Some were from truckers who'd pulled over to the shoulder to call in. One came from a teacher on her prep period. Several came from numbers that trace back to VFW halls. And one came as an email. A veteran from Texas who simply wrote, "We saw you. Now we see her too." The radio station posted the interview online. The clip didn't go viral, not in the usual way. It didn't spark a hashtag. No dramatic visuals, no outrage bait. But it traveled, quietly, through text threads, through message boards for home health workers, through Facebook groups for parents of disabled children, through rural school newsletters and Sunday service bulletins. It wasn't the most shared post of the week, but it was the most printed, the most read out loud, and J.D. never once used it to ask for votes. He didn't need to, because something in Aaron's letter cut past the rhetoric, past the parties, past the networks arguing over who won the hearing. It was a reminder that some stories don't exist to be dissected. They exist just to be known. And sometimes being known is all that people have left. For the rest of the day, J.D. didn't do any more interviews. He didn't return to the Capitol. He took a quiet drive through Meigs County instead, rolling past faded signs for closed factories and rusted mailboxes taped shut. At a stoplight, a man in a denim jacket tapped on J.D.'s car window. "Was her name really Sophie?" he asked. J.D. nodded. The man didn't say anything else, just placed his hand on the roof of the car for a moment and walked away. 3 weeks after the hearing, the buzz had started to die down. But J.D. hadn't. In a quiet corner office 2 floors below the Senate chamber, he sat surrounded by thick yellow legal pads, a map of outdated power grids, and a single sheet of paper taped to the wall with a sentence written in black marker. "All I asked was for someone to see us before we disappeared." That wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a soundbite. It was the blueprint. He called it the Resilience Act, a bill that wasn't about coal or solar or wind, not about left or right, just about working systems in places that Washington had learned to ignore. The proposed bill didn't promise flashy overhauls or Green New Deal headlines. It focused on retrofitting emergency backup power to rural clinics, on ensuring battery caches for ventilators and oxygen machines in underserved counties, on building redundancy, not revolution. The language was careful, not passionate, but precise, and it worked. Even before it was filed, something unusual happened. A few Democrats showed interest. Not the loud ones, not the media darlings, but the quiet legislators from states with counties that hadn't seen federal money since dial-up internet. Senators from Montana, New Mexico, West Virginia. Representatives who had spent years drafting grant proposals for districts where one snowstorm could cost lives, and often did. They read JD's outline and didn't roll their eyes. One even said, "It's not partisan. It's overdue." Meanwhile, in her own office just down the hall, Jasmine Crockett read the early draft in silence. Her communications team had suggested putting out a statement, maybe even proposing a counterbill focused on clean energy redundancy. A softer pivot, a way to save face. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she stood at her window, watching clouds move past the Capitol dome. In her hand was a manila folder marked Vance Resilience Bill Draft. Inside were printouts, a chart of pediatric care clinics in Appalachia, handwritten notes JD had included from nurses who'd responded to the radio interview. One page had a highlighted quote from a West Texas mother. "We don't care what fuel it runs on. We just need it to run." Jasmine flipped through the pages once more. No sound bites, no jabs, no branding. She didn't tweet that day, didn't book interviews, didn't even schedule a press release. Because somewhere beneath the friction of ideology and ambition, something had landed. Something she hadn't been ready to hear, but couldn't ignore anymore. JD, meanwhile, didn't talk about bipartisanship. He didn't parade the cross-aisle support. He just kept working, redlining clauses, reviewing Medicaid tie-ins, calling county engineers for testimony drafts. The staffers around him didn't buzz with excitement. They moved with something heavier: purpose. In an era where most legislation was written with donor talking points and media-friendly acronyms, the Resilience Act felt different. It didn't promise to save the planet. It didn't try to change the world. It just tried to keep someone breathing through the night, and somehow in a town that had long forgotten how to do the small things that felt radical. No press advisory went out, no staff convoy, no official schedule filed. J.D. Vance drove himself. A black sedan with no decals and no tinted windows rolled quietly into the hills of Harlan County under a pale, overcast sky. The kind of weather that holds its breath, not gray enough to threaten rain, not bright enough to pretend optimism. He parked at the edge of a dirt road where pavement gave up and gravel took over. A hand-painted sign nailed to a crooked post read, "Maple Hollow Mobile Estates." Below it, in fading marker, "Private property, please drive slow." Kids. There were no kids, just scattered trailers, aluminum siding dulled by time, wind chimes rusting in the breeze. Dogs barked once or twice and then stopped. A few curtains shifted. JD didn't knock on any doors. He didn't need to. Erin was already waiting. She stood outside her trailer, arms crossed, not in hostility, but habit. A windbreaker zipped halfway against the chill. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "Thought you might not come," she said. "I told myself I would," JD replied, stepping forward. She nodded, then turned. "You want coffee?" "No, thank you." They didn't shake hands, just walked side by side down the dirt path that ran behind the trailer lots, the same one Sophie used to ride her tricycle on before the battery died and the seat cracked in the heat. At the edge of the path stood a bench, 2 milk crates and an old truck tailgate. They sat, not close, not far. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. For several minutes, they said nothing, just listened to the creaking of a distant clothesline, the distant groan of a coal train miles away, the sound of a wind that carried more memory than motion. JD glanced down at his hands. Erin kept hers tucked under her sleeves. "She liked butterflies," she said eventually. He nodded. "I remember. She used to point at the TV and say, 'That's you.' I told her no, it's just a man in a suit. But she'd say, 'He listens.' Funny thing, huh?" JD didn't speak. He didn't have to. Erin reached into the bag beside her and pulled something out. A small plastic flashlight, pink, scratched. The light barely flickered when she clicked it, but it still worked. A faded sticker of a cartoon cat clung to the handle. "She used to wave it around like a wand," Erin said softly. "Said it kept the dark away. I didn't have the heart to tell her the batteries were dying." JD reached forward, not to take it, but to see. His hand hovered near hers, close enough to feel the plastic's chill, but far enough to respect its weight. "That light," Erin whispered, "was the only thing still glowing when they came." They sat like that for a while, the flashlight resting between them on the tailgate. No campaign talk, no legislation, no talk of bills or hearings or moments gone viral. Just two people sitting in the shadow of a silence that once had a name. When JD finally stood to leave, Aaron looked up and said one last thing. "You didn't save her. I know that." JD nodded. "I know. But you hurt her." He nodded again. And somehow, for the first time in months, she exhaled. The hill behind Aaron's trailer wasn't much of a hill, just a gentle rise where the grass grew patchy and the soil turned to shale near the top. But to Sophie, it had once been a kingdom. She called it Butterfly Mountain. That's where they went. The sun had begun to dip behind the tree line, spilling orange light across the sky like the last breath of something old and quiet. JD carried the lamp. Aaron held a small plaque, still wrapped in its brown paper backing. No one else followed. No cameras, no staffers, just wind, light, and the sound of old leaves brushing past their ankles. At the top of the hill, there was no ceremony. JD knelt beside a flat stone and began to dig. Nothing dramatic, just a small anchor point for the base of the solar lamp. Aaron stood beside him, watching the trees sway. When he was done, she handed him the plaque. He peeled back the paper slowly, revealing a line carved into a soft sheet of brushed steel. "She didn't get the light, but she gave it to us." JD didn't ask who wrote it. He didn't need to. Some truths didn't come from policy language or campaign speechwriters. They came from people who had been left in the dark long enough to understand what light really meant. He fixed the plaque to the base and pressed the lamp into the earth. It flickered once, unsteady from the shadows, then stabilized. A soft, steady glow. Not bright, but present. Aaron stepped back, arms crossed against the wind, and said nothing. JD didn't speak either. He just stood beside her, watching the lamp hold its own against the falling night. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked. A screen door slammed. And still, they stood, for a long while, until the sky turned navy and the lamp was the only visible point on the hill, like a signal to no one and everyone all at once. JD didn't take a picture, but someone else did. From the edge of the trailer park, a local reporter, who had promised not to intrude, snapped a photo from a respectful distance. He didn't zoom in, didn't shout questions, just captured the outline of two figures standing beside a single light. He posted it later that night with no caption, but the image did what no headline could. It moved. Within hours, it began appearing on timelines and message boards, alongside simple comments like, This is what remembering looks like. She never got power, but now no one can look away. Butterfly Mountain, one light, every reason. By morning, the photo had gone viral, not as part of a press cycle, but as part of something quieter, deeper. It became a screensaver, a church bulletin cover, a poster in a nursing home hallway. No logos, no names, just a lamp and the line beneath it. JD never commented on the image. Aaron didn't grant interviews. No one tried to spin it. And maybe that was the power of it, because not everything needed to be said. Not every stand required a podium. Some lights weren't made for stage lighting. They were made for the hills no one was watching. Until now. The letter came folded into thirds, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no return address. There was no staffer to screen it. It had arrived through an old community P.O. box linked to Jasmine's first campaign. Long forgotten, except by the kinds of people who didn't send emails or tag their representatives in tweets. It was written in blue ink, the loops tall and careful, as if someone had practiced what they wanted to say before ever putting pen to paper. "You made us angry," it began. "You laughed when someone like us was being spoken for. That hurt more than you probably meant it to. But then, we saw you. We saw you vote yes. We saw you listen. We're a family in Alabama. Lost our cousin to a bad winter storm. Oxygen ran out. Backup generator failed. No news covered it. We didn't even know there was a bill until last week. Just wanted to say, you helped. Whether you meant to or not, you helped." Jasmine read the letter twice. Then again, she didn't tell her team about it, didn't file it in the usual constituent input folders. Instead, she slipped it into the side pocket of her leather bag, the one she kept zipped and untouched during most hearings. That afternoon, she walked the Capitol corridors a little slower, Not distracted, but aware. Aware of how many voices didn't echo through these halls, how many names never made it into bills or transcripts or viral moments. By early evening, the halls had mostly cleared. The final votes of the day had been cast. Staffers were filtering out, heels and leather soles tapping against the marble like the last notes of a piece almost done playing. She turned a corner and nearly bumped into him. J.D. Vance. No cameras, no reporters, just the hum of hallway lights and the hush of a building catching its breath. For a second, neither spoke. He moved slightly to the side to let her pass. She didn't. Instead, she met his gaze. Not with defiance, not with distance, but with something simpler, something real. I read the draft, she said. He didn't react. I voted yes, she added. I know, J.D. said quietly. She reached into her bag, thought about the letter, didn't take it out. Instead, she said, "Thank you." He raised an eyebrow just slightly. "For reminding us," she clarified, "who we serve and who we forget." J.D. gave a nod, not triumphant, not approving. Just a shared acknowledgement that some conversations didn't need an audience. She stepped past him. A few steps later, she turned and added one last thing. I didn't hear her voice the first time. Not really, I heard the silence after. J.D. didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because some apologies aren't apologies. Some acknowledgments don't require headlines. Sometimes a moment changes people not by breaking them, but by waking them up. And sometimes that's enough. The first sign of trouble wasn't in the headlines. It was in the hallways. J.D. Vance entered the Russell Senate office building that morning with a folder under one arm and a thermos of lukewarm coffee in the other. But something had shifted. Conversation stopped when he walked past. Not rudely, just momentarily, like people waiting for the storm to pass. By midday, the lobbyists arrived. They didn't come with pitchforks. They came with talking points. Energy coalitions, healthcare consortiums, defense contractors with peripheral ties to infrastructure. They all flooded Capitol Hill with briefing memos, anonymous op-eds, and concerned citizen reports that somehow bore the logos of private firms. The message was clear. The Resilience Act was a problem. Not because it cost too much, it didn't. Not because it was impractical, it wasn't. But because it worked outside the usual system. J.D.'s bill didn't tie infrastructure to contracts that benefited coastal firms. It didn't inflate budgets with vague climate promises or military incentives. It simply worked, quietly, efficiently, and without asking permission from those who usually wrote the script. And that made it dangerous. By week's end, one think tank labeled J.D. a dangerous populist. A senior member of a major committee warned in private that the bill was too rural, too emotional, too radical in its simplicity. A respected columnist wrote, "This isn't about policy. It's about performance art dressed as a legislation." Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. J.D. received calls from donors. Suggestions were made, gentle at first, then firm. Pull the funding for the medical battery initiative. That's where the resistance is. Add a green energy clause. Give them something flashy. Tie it to broadband. Make it a tech bill. But he said no, and the calls kept coming. Yet outside the Capitol, a different current surged. Veterans for Vance, a small Facebook group started by two retired medics, suddenly exploded. Their post of the Butterfly Mountain photo was now framed in dozens of VFW halls. Truckers posted it on their dashboards. Nurses wore pins that read, "We still try." Local papers in Kentucky, Ohio, and Alabama ran editorials not just in support of the bill, but in defense of its quietness. We don't need another symbol. We need something that works when the lights go out. By the second week of pushback, J.D.'s office received over 7,000 handwritten letters. Most weren't dramatic. They were simple, real. Our generator broke last year. This bill matters. We lost Dad during an outage. Thank you. Just don't let them water it down. Staffers began pinning these letters along the hallway walls. Even senators who hadn't supported J.D. before started to pause. Not because of political calculus, but because their mailrooms were overflowing. Inside the Capitol, things grew louder. Strategy meetings, power plays, whispers of procedural stalls. But J.D. didn't flinch. because he'd already learned something that Washington had forgotten. You can't fight silence with spin. You can only listen to what it leaves behind. And in that silence, one truth had begun to rise. Steady, unshakable. This wasn't about ideology anymore. It was about who got to keep breathing when the power went out. The Senate floor was rarely this full on a Thursday afternoon. But today wasn't just procedure. It was a reckoning. C-SPAN cameras swept the chamber. On one side, J.D. Vance sat quietly, notes folded in half in front of him. On the other side, Jasmine Crockett stood, eyes steady, voice low but unmistakably firm. Her first words startled the room. This isn't about red or blue. This is about whether your grandmother breathes through the night. This is about whether the emergency button works when it matters. This is about power or none. There were no smirks today. No hashtags. Just heat in the room, thick as tension. A Republican senator from Missouri pushed back. We can't pass bills based on one family's misfortune. Jasmine turned toward him, not angry, just tired. It wasn't one family. It's just the only one we listen to. Then she stepped aside. A screen behind her lit up. The Senate chamber, typically reserved for graphs and bullet points, instead echoed with the voice of a rural nurse from West Virginia. It was a clip sent to JD's office days earlier, vetted and confirmed. Now with consent, it was part of the record. The nurse's words were plain. We're not solar ready, we're barely running. I carry 2 portable oxygen units on my night shift. You can argue grid futures, we argue batteries. Every night. The room went still. Another senator tried to pivot, saying the grid investments were already planned, that the administration had addressed it, but the facts didn't land the same anymore. Not after Sophie, not after the silence. Aides passed around a new data packet. Power instability across Appalachia, the Midwest, native reservations, areas where no media vans ever parked. JD stood briefly, not for a grand speech, but just to say this. You don't have to agree with me, but vote as if the next power outage is going to knock on your own door, and no one comes. He sat down again. Jasmine crossed her arms. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. But she didn't object either. The debate turned heated again. Filibuster threats, procedural delays, a motion to recommit. But it didn't matter. Something had cracked. Because every senator, whether they admitted it or not, had received one of the same letters. Not from PACs, not from think tanks, but from voters who had never written a single political sentence in their lives. Handwritten, shaky, sometimes misspelled. Don't argue this one, just fix it. We watched the clip. We cried, now do something. As the chamber prepared to vote, a sense of gravity settled in. Not just politics, consequence. What began with a smirk now ended in a stare, a long, sober one across the aisle. JD's hands rested atop the folder on his desk, the same envelope tucked neatly inside. Jasmine tapped her fingers once, then folded them. No more sound. The clerk stood, ready to call the roll. And in that breathless moment, even those who had planned to say no paused. The roll call began like any other. Names, titles, yay, nay. Nothing cinematic, just procedure. But in the gallery above, the silence was different. A row of veterans sat shoulder to shoulder, arms folded, not one phone out. A nurse from Harlan County stood near the back wall, badge still clipped to her scrubs. And behind her, 3 high school students held handwritten signs. We remember Sophie. Jasmine sat still, gaze low, lips pressed. J.D. Vance kept his head down, scribbling something unseen. When the final vote echoed across the chamber, it wasn't the number that hit, it was the margin, 52 to 48. The Resilience Act had passed. 3 votes, no cheers, no applause, just breath. The kind people forget they've been holding until it escapes. Majority Leader nodded. Motion carries. J.D. didn't stand. He didn't shake hands. He quietly closed his folder and rose, coat already in hand, moving through a side hallway, rarely used by media. A reporter caught a glimpse and whispered into her mic, Vance just walked out. No statement yet, But JD wasn't heading to a camera. He stepped into the sunlight outside the Capitol, away from the chatter, pulled out his phone and found the number. It rang once, then again. Then Erin answered. Her voice was scratchy, wind in the background, the hum of bird songs somewhere nearby. JD cleared his throat. It passed. There was a long pause. No sob, no exhale. Just silence and then, good. Now let's make sure no one else dies waiting. JD nodded. She couldn't see it, but somehow she knew. We'll talk soon. We will, she said. He stayed standing there, phone still in hand, looking down the Capitol steps. Inside, the news broke. Cable shows began their split screens. Bipartisan shock vote. Vance's rural gambit pays off. A new chapter? Social media exploded again, but this time with different voices. A mother in Ohio posted, "My son's oxygen machine runs better than our government." But today, someone finally heard us. A coal miner in Pennsylvania shared, "We've worked in the dark for generations." Maybe someone's turning on the lights. The hashtag Resilience Act trended for 17 hours. But JD didn't post. He just walked. Through Capitol grounds, past statues, past names carved into stone, past people who once fought similar battles but never saw their names in headlines. Inside his coat pocket, the envelope was still there. A worn crease down the middle. No need to reopen it. He knew every word. At a nearby cafe, Jasmine sat alone by the window, watching the news scroll across a muted TV. A staffer approached with her next brief, but she waved them off. She watched a clip play silently. JD at the desk, the vote tally on screen, then him walking away. She whispered just to herself, "It passed." There was no smile, just the faintest sense of relief, and the knowledge that she had played a part, even if no one would headline it. Outside, JD paused once more, turning back toward the building, not to look at the dome, but at a second-floor window. There, barely visible, was the reflection of Sophie's mother in the gallery. She hadn't left yet. Neither had the story. In a small public high school in Ames, Iowa, room 213 wasn't anything special. The linoleum was cracked near the heater. The flag above the whiteboard hung slightly uneven, and the desk bore the names of long-graduated students etched into wood. But on this morning, the usual civics lecture didn't begin with a textbook. Instead, Mr. Rollins wheeled out the old projector cart. "Today," he said, plugging in the audio, "we talk about power. Not just energy, but the kind that decides who gets seen." He pressed play. The screen flickered, then settled on JD Vance at the Senate hearing. No narration, no commentary, just the 29-second audio clip, the same one that had changed the tone of a nation. Static, a woman's voice, soft and shaking. "We're dying here. Just want someone to know." Then the silence, not just in the recording, but in the classroom itself. No one moved. Even the fidgeters stayed still. Mr. Rollins let the silence linger before he spoke. "That was Sophie's mom. Sophie was 4. A hand slowly went up. It belonged to Ellie, a junior in the second row, always dressed in yellow. "Why did that lady laugh?" she asked. "The one before the clip." A few students shifted. They remembered the viral footage. Jasmine's smirk, the cold joke, the way it had lit up TikTok like wildfire. Mr. Rollins paused. He walked to the whiteboard and wrote in big letters, "Because we laugh at what we don't understand." He looked back at the class. "Until someone shows us." The room stayed quiet, not because they were confused, but because something old was cracking. The kind of silence that comes not from awkwardness, but recognition. Another voice, lower, came from the back. It was Malik, a senior with a baseball scholarship and a deep, thoughtful way of speaking only when it mattered. "Where is Sophie now?" The teacher didn't answer right away. Instead, he erased the board, picked up the marker again, and wrote slowly, "She's the reason we talk today." A lump caught in someone's throat. No one said who. Outside the window, wind moved through the cornfields, long and slow. Time didn't feel rushed anymore. It felt held. The bell rang, but no one got up. Mr. Rollins finally closed the laptop. "She didn't get a hearing. She got remembered. And sometimes," he said, voice softer now, That's the kind of power that lasts longer than policy. As students filed out, a few glanced back at the paused video frame. JD looking down, Jasmine silent beside him, the committee room frozen in that moment where everything had shifted. Ellie lingered. She walked up to the desk and asked, "Can I do my paper on her?" "Sophie?" She nodded. "She wasn't famous, but I think she mattered." Mr. Rollins smiled. "She still does." He handed her the USB from the cart. "Take this, but treat it like a heartbeat." She cradled it in her palm like it might break. Then she left. And in that quiet, faded classroom, in a middle state school barely funded and rarely noticed, Legacy didn't shout. It whispered. The first thing the drone sees is green. Eastern Kentucky stretches wide under a low sunrise, mist clinging to the treetops, the trailer roofs below catching the first gold rays of morning. Then the camera tilts, slowly, toward a hill that overlooks the town. What was once an unmarked patch of grass is now a ring of light. Dozens of solar lamps, short, utilitarian, unbranded, form a gentle perimeter around a single older one. The first, Sophie's. Each new lamp has a small metal tag. No names, no titles. Just towns. Harlan, Pikeville, Martin, Owsley, Letcher. Each represents a story someone didn't hear in time. The drone hovers still for a beat. Then it dips lower, passing the small engraved plaque in the center of the circle. Funded by the Resilience Act, in honor of those who died in the dark. No statue, no marble, just practical light. A group of volunteers is present that morning. Quiet, flannel-clad, boots in the wet grass. No media crews, no press releases. They adjust a few lights knocked off center by last night's wind. One woman, who looks barely 20, pulls a laminated letter from her back pocket and gently tucks it under Sophie's lamp, weighing it down with a flat stone. It reads in part, "We lived in a place they said didn't matter, but now my kid sleeps with a light on. That matters." A man from the local VA adds another light to the outer circle. He doesn't say much, just looks up at the sky and then down again. Later that day, a single image from the drone will be posted by an anonymous user on a veterans forum. No caption, no hashtag, just the photo, a glowing circle of light on a Kentucky hilltop, taken from the air. It spreads within hours. It doesn't trend on Twitter. It doesn't make cable news. But it appears in text threads between mothers, in the back channels of medical workers, on community boards of churches and diners. One nurse comments, "This is what policy should look like." In D.C., Senator Vance's team receives no official memo, just a forwarded link from a staffer with 3 words in the subject line. It worked. Quietly. JD doesn't respond. He just opens the image, saves it, and changes the background on his phone. That night in her home office, Jasmine Crockett pulls the same image up on her laptop. She stares at it longer than she expected. And for the first time since the vote, she opens the draft of a new proposal. She doesn't name it, doesn't rush it, just types the first line. If resilience is light, then let's stop building shadows. Back in Kentucky, the sun sets. One by one, the lamps flicker to life. The first one, Sophie's, burns slightly dimmer than the rest, but it's still there, still glowing, still the reason the others exist. The study was quiet, lit only by the amber glow of a desk lamp. The hum of Washington's evening traffic barely reached through the thick windows, and the usual buzz of staff messages had long gone silent. J.D. Vance sat at his desk, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up, his tie loosened hours ago. In front of him lay an old leather-bound journal, edges worn, corners softened from use, the kind of notebook that had traveled through more than one campaign and more than one loss. He ran his hand over the cover, pausing for a moment before opening it. Inside, the pages were uneven in ink and tone, some filled with anger, others with hope, a few with fatigue. But tonight, what he wrote came slowly, thoughtfully. No policy lines, no legislative notes, just a sentence, simple and final. We speak for them not because it's easy, but because they can't. He stared at the words longer than usual, as if letting them settle in the room. There was no audience here, no cameras, no speechwriters, no one waiting for a quote to tweet or a headline to spin. It was just him and the page, and the knowledge that something had shifted, not only in the Senate or on the bill's voting record, but in him. JD leaned back in his chair and glanced toward the bookshelf behind him. Among thick volumes of policy and law, one item stood out, a small photo in a plain wooden frame. It wasn't of a campaign rally or a Capitol Hill handshake. It was a snapshot someone had sent, a single solar lamp on a hill in Kentucky, glowing alone. He smiled faintly, then gently closed the journal. No press release would be sent. No one would know what he had written, or why, or for whom. That was never the point. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, taxis passing under streetlights, aides walking fast with coffee cups in hand, lobbyists finishing late dinners. Inside his study, it was still. JD stood, tucked the journal back onto the second shelf where he always kept it, and turned off the lamp. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. In the darkened room, the quiet was not heavy, it was earned. The kind that comes after a decision that took too long to be made, and yet still came just in time for someone else. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps soft against the old wood floor, the echo barely reaching the front door. There would be more hearings, more votes, more fights. But some moments don't repeat, some voices don't return, and some silences never leave you. 30 seconds of audio, spoken by a woman who had nothing left to ask, had outlasted every prepared speech that followed it. And in that silence, something unexpected had happened. Not a scandal, not a soundbite, but a shift, a turning. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the loss, but it made it known. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. This story isn't just about politics or power, it's about presence. It reminds us that real change often begins in the quietest moments when someone chooses to listen instead of speak. JD didn't win by debating louder. He let a mother's voice echo through the room and through the country. It's a powerful reminder that policy isn't abstract. It's personal, lived, and sometimes lost in the dark. And yet that loss can light the way for others. Question for the audience. Have you ever heard a voice, maybe quiet, maybe trembling, that changed the way you saw the world? Whose silence are we still not hearing today? If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.